Disclaimer. Any of the guidance offered by the podcast host, myself, or the podcast guests is our own guidance. We are not liable for any of the actions the podcast listener decides to do. Welcome to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast today with me, Johnny Pardo. And today I welcome Deven Rodriguez to the show, and I'm very excited to meet Deven. We were just meaning to meet, and I'm excited to hear about Deven's journey with podcasting and helping people share their voice through that method as well. So just a quick introduction to Deven. So Deven is the founder of Podcast Guests, the leading podcast booking agency that focuses on helping business owners leverage podcast guesting to drive revenue for their business. Rather than just focusing on booking, Deven's expertise lies in his ability to share the best practices and strategies to turn podcast interviews into a client acquisition system. Welcome to the show today, Deven. Glad to have you.
Johnny, I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you, man. It is a really big honor to be on your show. It is no BS, one of my favorite podcasts out there, just from the standpoint of how you ask questions, how you give space to your guest and the value that you're providing. So just want to say thanks for having me on, man. I know the work being a podcaster myself that it takes to be able to do something like this. So anybody that's tuning into this, listen, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, leave a 5-star rating and review for Johnny, because those things really do make a big difference and allow him to impact more people. Man, I'm thrilled to be here and just have a great discussion.
No, I appreciate that, the kind words. And thank you for the shout outs. Deven, I'd love to know, how did you first discover like the power of podcasting in your life?
Yeah, so let me give the audience a little bit of context. Let me paint the picture so that they can know if this is even a conversation that's worth them listening to, right? So we live in a society today in the world, especially in the online world, where as a business owner, it's getting harder and harder to be able to acquire clients. And the biggest reason behind that is because there's such a low level of trust that exists in the modern marketplace. So what we do with Podcast Guests.io is very simple. We're helping business owners leverage podcasts, where it's a long format over the course of 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, to develop peak trust with their audience so that they can acquire clients as a result of the trust that they build. But that is definitely not where this started, right? When it comes to podcasts. For me though, Johnny, it actually came about 10 years ago. Let's rewind the tape a little bit. I was bullied a lot. So as a kid, I was constantly bullied. And when I went to high school, that's when things kind of started to turn a little bit for me. And I remember one specific situation where, I don't know about you, Johnny, but as like a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, my full-time job during the summer was playing Call of Duty. Okay, that was all I did 24/7, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, I got to get on with my friends. Anyways, one day I was sitting there playing Call of Duty at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my dad calls me out to the table. He says, Deven, get out here. Deven, get out. And I try to ignore him because I'm in a game of search and destroy. Okay, with my clan on Modern Warfare 2. If anybody's listening and they remember, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, he keeps screaming out to me though, Deven, get out here. So finally I go out to the table and he says, sit down. I said, Dad, listen, I'm in the middle of a game right now. Can I just come back when he says, sit down? I was like, all right, is everything okay? He said, yes, I just have a question to ask you. I was like, all right, Dad, what is it? He says, what makes you different from anyone who's ever achieved anything great? I was like, Dad, listen, you brought me out here to ask me this question? Dad, can I just go back and to answer my question? I said, Dad, listen, I don't know. I was in high school at the time. So I said, Dad, I'm just a normal student. I'm just average like everybody else. And he said, Deven, never forget what I'm about to tell you. Anyone who's ever achieved anything great in this world puts on their pants one leg at a time, just like you do. Anyone who's achieved anything great in this world puts on their shirt one arm at a time, just like you do. So I ask you again, what makes you different? And I said, Dad, listen, are we finally done here? Thanks for this, beautiful soliloquy, but are we done? He says, okay, yeah, we're done. You can go back in your room. But Johnny, I believe, and I'm sure that there's some people that are listening to this right now that have been in the position where somebody has planted a seed in them, where it just couldn't leave them alone, the thing that person said. So that night when I tried to go to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what my dad told me. So I decided, Johnny, and when I'm going to bring this full circle, that I was going to go to school and I was going to put my full effort forward. And I said, you know what? I'm going to find out for myself if my dad's actually right when he says that I could be great too. So anyways, I went from being like number 60 in my class to being number 5 in my class within a matter of like 4 months. And at that moment, I was like, oh my God, I can do anything great. So the reason why I bring that up is because once I realized that I had the capability to raise my self-esteem, my confidence, which is why I love your podcast so much that it's themed like that, my desire became to help other people do the same. So I wanted to become this big motivational speaker. One of the person that I looked up to the most was a guy by the name of Les Brown. Okay, which I saw on your Zoom picture when we first came in here, right? So clearly you know who Les Brown is. So fast forward a few years, I went to college, I graduated, I went into the United States military, and I went to a course that's called Ranger School. It's a 62-day long course. It's like one of the toughest courses in the world. I failed on day one. Okay, well, that's a discussion for another time. But you know what? And there's some things in life, Johnny, that I've found that God knows that there's something better for you on the other side of that. And I just had that feeling within me, like something good is coming from this. Anyways, there was an app back in 2020, 2021. It was called Clubhouse. And it was a big audio-based, platform where if everybody was talking about mindset, you jump into the room and you start talking. Well, I got invited to Clubhouse because back at the time you needed an invite to join. As soon as I joined, Johnny, guess whose room I saw? Les Brown. Les Brown. I started freaking out. I was like, oh my God, it's Les Brown. So I joined the room and he started talking about this program that he was launching called Hungry to Speak. I'm going to teach you how to tell your story, get on stages, monetize your message. And I'm just getting so excited. I'm like, yes. So he says, okay, how much? I couldn't stop wondering, how much is this going to cost? So finally he got to the price. He says, and it's only $297. Now, Johnny, I was 22 years old at the time, just graduated college, just bought a new house, just bought a new car. I did not have $297. So I called my dad. I said, Dad, listen, you know Les Brown? He said, of course I know Les Brown. I said, Dad, listen, he's offering this coaching program called Hungry to Speak. He says, great, join it. I said, there's one problem. He says, what is it? I said, it's $297 a month. I don't have it. He says, okay, you want me to lend it to you? I said, no, Dad, you've done enough. And he said these words to me, Johnny, which have really become instrumental in my life. He said, figure it out. So I pulled out a credit card that I had got when I was 18 years old that got 34% interest on it. I'm not looking for financial advice here, Johnny. Okay. Anyway, 34% interest. And I held it out in front of me and I asked myself the question. I said, are my goals and my dreams worth it? And I think that that's a question that a lot of people that are listening to this podcast need to ask themselves when they're confronted with a similar situation. For me, I sat there and I said, you know what? Yeah. So I joined the program. 2 weeks later, I get an email to sign up for my onboarding call. Signed up for the onboarding call. Guess who onboarded me? I get on the Zoom call and it was Les Brown. I almost lost my mind. He said, son, what do you want to do with your voice? He didn't say hello. He didn't say, how you doing? The first thing he said on that call was, what do you want to do with your voice? I said, sir, I remember at the time I wanted to be a motivational speaker. So I said, sir, I'm going to be the greatest speaker in the world. He said, oh boy, it looks like we got a lot of work to do. So I share all of that to say, I started working with him and it became a very personal relationship, because he saw the effort that I was putting forward. But here's what happened. I started getting pretty good at telling my personal story. And I would go on Clubhouse and I started telling more stories. And that was like my form of practice. People started to message me and say, Deven, have you ever thought about teaching people how to do this? I was like, teaching people how to do what? It was a woman from Boston. Her name was Heidi. She said, you ever thought about teaching people how to do this? I said, no, I speak. I don't teach other people. And she says, well, you should think about it. I said, no, I'm good, Heidi. Well, guess what I did? I went and I checked my bank account and I had -$7. So I went back to Heidi and I said, Heidi, were you serious about that? And she was like, yeah. So I started a program called Storypreneur where I started teaching entrepreneurs how to tell their story. But to bring this full circle, to answer your question directly, how we got into podcasting was I also had my own podcast. I've had it for about 7 years. The biggest problem that my clients had at the time was we would get very good at helping them craft their message, articulate their story, and really craft a message that transformed an audience both individually and collectively. But the biggest problem, Johnny, was they didn't have a platform. So I was driving home. Are you familiar with, you must be, James Clear, Atomic Habits?
Yeah. I can see the book over there.
Okay. So I'm driving home from work. I was in the military at the time. And he was on a podcast. Podcast host asked them, they said, James, what is something that you say no to a lot? And James said, well, funny enough, one of the things I say no to all of the time are public speaking gigs. Now, remember, I wanted to be a public speaker. So public speaking gigs, you say no. He says, that's why I charge $200,000. And whoa, the host said, why would you ever say no to $200,000 an hour? He says, well, it's very simple. And this is this was like that clicking moment. He says, when you speak in a room, the work dies. In other words, when I speak in a room, nobody outside of those walls is really going to ever hear this message. Sure, I could clip it up, post it online. He says, but you see what we're doing on this podcast? He says, in 10 years from now, people could hear this. They can go buy my book. They can hire me for private consulting. He said, in other words, the question that entrepreneurs need to ask themselves is, what is the work that when I do it just one time, it will continue to work for me forever? And he said, this podcast is exactly that. In that moment, I call it a God moment. It was like, boom, you can't just teach people how to craft their story and their message. You need to also get them booked on podcasts. And that was the birth of podcastguest.io.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Crazy ride, man. I'll tell you that much.
Just getting people, their voices out there and getting as many as possible. And you're right, like you can discover a podcast many months or years down the road, right? People often go back to episode 1, episode 0, and that
never stops working for you. That's the beauty behind it, right? It's like people say it's, I'm sure you've heard it, evergreen, but like, what does that actually mean, right? How I think about it, Johnny, is in terms of leverage. As a business owner, especially, leverage is simply defined as you getting more out of what you put in. So whatever you're looking at in terms of marketing, what I typically tell people is you want to look for the things that are going to help you multiply the effort or the dollars that you put into it with the most predictability. So yeah, 100%. You're spot on with that. That's why I love podcasts. That's why I started my own podcast long ago, right? I was like, this is going to be great. This is going to be evergreen forever. So I 100% agree with what you're saying.
And I know there's a lot of different ways of people getting out there, and you're utilizing podcasting to help people do that. You started your own show. What is kind of, for you, the difference between someone getting on podcasts versus going out more and trying to get on more social media?
Yeah, well, okay. The first thing I usually tell people is, unless you're Kim Kardashian, it's going to be a long road. Okay, so Kim Kardashian could pretty much sell her toenails in a Ziploc bag for $100,000 because she's Kim Kardashian. Most people that are listening to this are probably in the place where they know that they need more exposure and they think that they need to go post like crazy on social media. Couple of big problems that come along with this, Johnny. First thing is, unless you already have a very big audience, it's going to be very hard to get traction. Second thing is, let's say you do go viral. You get 100,000 followers. That's a lot of followers from like one post. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of those people. So the big difference between podcasts and social media is people go to social media for entertainment, but people go to podcasts for education. So if you're a business owner and you're listening to this, you need to ask yourself the question, where can I get in front of the highest intent leads? See, it's not just leads, it's leads that have the highest intent that are most likely to take action. If you're just getting a bunch of followers on social media, that tells you nothing about their level of commitment. But if you're getting on a podcast, you know that people that listen to podcasts are there because they want to improve. So let's say you help people lose weight. One of your posts goes viral. Cool. Do you know the quality of that audience? No. But if you go on a podcast that talks specifically about weight loss, you know that everybody that's listening to that show probably wants to lose weight or knows somebody that wants to lose weight. And that's why they're listening, because they want to help that person out. So that's the second piece, is the quality of the audience that you are getting in front of. But here's the thing. The third point is leverage. Once again, I'm in the game of multiplication. I want to get the most out of what I put in. So with that being said, if I could come on your podcast, Johnny, as an example, you've already built a podcast with millions of downloads, with hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people listening. Instead of me trying to go viral on social media and doing some skits or staring at, setting up my tripod and then getting frustrated and throwing the phone because I didn't read the script right for the 13th time, why not just come on your stage that you've built over years and leverage your audience to get in front of my ideal client? So those are really the three biggest things. Is number one, it's going to take a really long time because you're not Kim Kardashian. Number two thing is the quality of the person and the intent of the person that you're getting in front of. And then the third piece is, why not market yourself in a way where you can just get predictably in front of the people that you're looking to reach? But here's the last thing, Johnny. If Mark Zuckerberg wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, or he gets a Charlie horse start in the middle of the night, or his wife forgets to put cream in his coffee, he could just change the algorithm. And then now the post that we're getting views no longer gets views. And now it's like what I always tell people is, it's like sitting on a stool that has one leg. It's really good until it's kicked out from underneath you. So those are the four things that I would say that differentiate social media from podcasts, not to take into consideration that I could take exactly what we do here, Johnny, and use this as my social media content. So now it allows me to produce more content with a fraction of the time.
It's a really important point. And I can resonate and relate to quite a lot of that, having done sales for people, work with people who do really well on their social media, and then selling my own services off of podcasts. People on social media, they may sometimes have a big crowd, but often it's like, oh my God, I love this person so much. They're so entertaining. But it's like the intent to like sign up or do more with them is just an extra hard job. Whereas like sometimes those who've listened to podcasts, they're like educated. They're like, right, I've really been studying, but I want to go that step further. I want to work with you. I've definitely found that in my experience as well.
Johnny, can I add one point here?
Yeah, love it.
So really what it ultimately comes down to is in today's modern marketplace, we have to understand, like I alluded to earlier in our chat, is where the market is. So people have been burned time and time again by people that overinflated promises and weren't able to deliver. So what does that mean? And I'm going to take this, I'm going to go deep for the people that are listening and maybe reflect back on your own experiences for those of you that are listening. Every time that you've gotten burned in the past, what that's done is psychologically, it's literally traumatized you. Where now each and every time that you get burned psychologically, you feel very unsafe. So if we want people to exchange dollars, what we ultimately have to optimize for is decreasing the level of risk that people have in their mind when it comes to working with us. In other words, we need to make people feel psychologically safe that if they invest in us, that it's going to turn out in their favor. But the only way that we make people feel psychologically safe, Johnny, is if we first develop trust with those people. Think about it. It's like if you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, the only time you feel safe is when you first trust that person. But the only way that you develop trust, and how I tell my clients is how we spell trust is T-I-M-E. The more time we get people to spend with us, the more they will trust us. The more they would trust us, the more psychologically safe they feel with us. The more psychologically safe, the more they will buy. So with that being said, podcast allows you to increase the amount of time that you spend with your ideal audience without you asking them for a thing. So now instead of you sitting on a sales call with somebody that came from social media that saw you from a 30-second clip and trying to convince them to buy what it is that you have, the thing I love about podcasts is that people come to the logical conclusion within themselves that they want what you have because they spent so much time with you in an environment where there was zero risk on their behalf, because all they did was show up and listen to you on a podcast. And that is probably the biggest difference between podcasts and social media marketing.
Like that. Yeah. And with less distractions as well, right?
Of course, right? Because it's like, you know, at least on a podcast, you can't just easily scroll to the next cat video.
Yeah. Or whatever's coming up on your algorithm or anything like that. So for someone who's like now thinking, oh, podcasts is a great idea, or they've been thinking that originally, what would you like recommend for someone who's wanting to share their voice? Get on more podcasts or start their own podcast, or maybe a bit of both?
Yeah. So I started my own podcast, Johnny, after I lost my grandmother tragically almost 10 years ago. The reason why I did it was I just purely did it for like a fun type of thing, right? So if you're somebody that's listening to this and you just want to start a podcast because you just want to have fun, do it. But if you're looking to leverage podcasts as a vehicle to help you generate business, I would recommend being a guest on other people's podcasts, because it's going to go back to what we talked about earlier. I don't know your journey, Johnny, but it took me a really long time to even crack 100 downloads per episode. And the reason why is because nobody knew who I was. But if I go on other podcasts, then I'm simply exposing myself to their audience. So in other words, instead of me having to sit there and do all of the work, I just go to somebody else's show that has already done the work and I leverage their audience. But I want to make sure I'm communicating this in the right way. What I'm not saying is just take advantage of people and just go on their podcast. The goal should be to genuinely add value to people's audiences, but you're doing it in a way where there's very high leverage. So now here's the thing. Go on other people's podcasts. You're going to start building your audience. Now that you're building your audience, now you start your own podcast, because now you have people that are actually going to tune into the podcast, right? So I always recommend, unless you have a mega audience, cool, then start your own. But I would recommend go on other people's shows, build your audience, and then start your own podcast.
I like that. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It did take a while. It does take a while. It did take a while for me to build up as well, and it's just like you for fun, and enjoyment, and there was no pressure to like hit the business goal or anything like that from me. But it did take a while. So yeah, I can totally see that approach if you're trying to get business, and or help people and serve people more quickly.
Well,
So
Johnny, it also comes down to the last thing I'll say is return on your time, right? People talk about return on investment, but ultimately time is your greatest investment. So with that being said, if you're a business owner and you want to leverage podcasts specifically to generate traffic for your business and ultimately help you grow, you have to look at where will my time, not just your dollars, because you could get those back, but your time you can't. Where are my dollars going to be best, or where's my time going to be best spent? And if it comes down to start a podcast or go on others, well, if you start your own, nobody's going to tune into it. That's not very good use of your time. But if you go on a podcast, even if it's a very small podcast, there's 100 people that are listening, but it's a highly targeted audience, it's a great use of your time, right? So I think it ultimately comes down to return on time.
I want to kind of go the approach of the individual who's wanting to get out there and share more of their voice, because I know you went through obviously the Les Brown training, which is awesome. You got to speak with him and be trained by him. I met him for a handshake once, so that was cool. And then the event you're speaking at, and you're just writing about 100 notes every 5 seconds. Anyway, for the person who's a little bit nervous about sharing their voice, how can someone work through that? Because I know a lot of people are scared of putting themselves out there, not just on social media, but on a podcast.
It's okay to feel those feelings. That's the first thing. And the reason why is because it's something that's new. It's something that's scary and just evolutionary. Okay, I don't know how to say the word, Johnny. I'm trying to get it, but I'm just going to say it like that. Evolutionary. Okay, for those of you that listen, make fun of me. It's okay. Okay, I still got an A back in English.
I struggle with words.
But evolutionary wise, there we go. When we were evolving, anything that was new was perceived as a threat. And whenever that happened, immediately that made us not want to really do that thing. But of course, as we evolved, that thing still exists within us. But as opposed to back in the day, which was like saber-toothed tigers and stuff, the threats that we experience are no longer tigers now, just like your show talks about. Once again, why I love it so much. Ultimately, it boils down to other people's approval, which ultimately impacts self-esteem. So a lot of the time when we think that, oh, I don't want to share my story, I don't want to share my message, it comes from a place of what other people are going to think about us. And by the way, I want to say 100%, you should care about what other people think about you, especially if you have a business, because ultimately what other people think about you is going to determine if other people pay you. With that being said, on the other end of the equation, I remember I went to an event a couple of years ago when I was in a really bad financial situation, and it was hosted by a guy named Jason Fladley, who's referred to as the king of webinars. And Jason was talking about sales, and I asked him a question. I was like, hey, listen, I really don't want to be too salesy. And he said something that I never really thought about before. He's like, Deven, I love to sell and I love to push people when I sell. I was like, why? I don't like feeling. He says, because here's the thing. You don't have to do it in a way where you feel super, and this is going to relate back to what I'm saying. It says, you don't have to feel like you're ramming it down somebody's throat. But ultimately, he says, the vision that I have in my head when I sell is that my prospect is like a guy that's in the Atlantic Ocean, 75-year-old. He goes out there in a canoe. He's deep into the ocean and a wave comes along and smashes him. He goes overboard. He starts drowning. Here I come on a boat. I throw out my life preserver to him. And then the prospect or the person on the other side is like, no, don't do it. I don't want it. Let me drown. And they're going to do everything in their ability to not change. So the reason why I bring this story up is because you have to understand that there's people on the other side of your message right now that just fell off of the canoe and are in a position where if they do not get your message, they're not going to live the life that they are capable of living. So for me, when I looked at it, ultimately what I really wanted to do was be remembered as somebody that really genuinely made an impact on people. So when you look on your end of the equation, for the person that's listening to this, if you are in a place where you're like, I want to share my message, but I don't know if I want to share my message, here's what I'll tell you. First and foremost, there's nothing worse, and I'm sure that there's somebody that's listening to this that can relate to being in the position where you knew you should have done the thing, but you didn't do it. And ultimately, that just leads to the deepest form of regret by every stretch of the imagination. So with that being said, feel those feelings of fear and what if people say this about me? But ultimately, just get started. Find a coach, find someone to support you. Go to a community, go to your local Toastmasters. Do something like that, because ultimately you're never going to feel as much fulfillment as helping the person that just fell off the side of the canoe, that's currently drowning, that feels like no matter what they do, they can't change their life. And the thing that I love most about the work that I do, Johnny, is when a client sends me a screenshot of a DM that they got from somebody that says something like, "You just changed my life." I've had clients send me screenshots of people that said, "Hey, just want to let you know that you took me off the brink of doing some very bad things to myself as a result of hearing your message." Wow. So the impact that the impact that people's words have on others literally change the world. But also on the other end, don't be hard on yourself. It's normal to have those feelings. I think we've all had those feelings, but it really just starts with one step in that direction of being willing to look foolish. Remember this, and I'll end on this. One of my mentors said something to me that really impacted me. He says, you have to be willing to be bad long enough in order to become good. So if you can do that and start putting your voice out there, what I could tell you is, especially if you're a business owner, your ability to communicate is directly correlated to how much money you're going to have in your bank account and the impact that you have on other people.
Powerful. I like what you said about being bad until you get good. That's the message.
For sure. I mean, a lot of people think that you're just going to wake up and be like this great speaker or something like that. It happens. I look back, Johnny, and I invite anybody that's listening to this, go to my Facebook and you'll see me when I was like 16 years old in New York City in my backyard. And I used to talk like this. And now I look back on it and I'm like, wow, you really can develop your voice.
I love that. Yeah. Looking back at, like you look back in the past, even if I go past previous videos and stuff, you can notice a difference. There is a change, but it's not like an overnight thing. I'd love to know a little bit about what you've learned from, you work with some amazing, like I've had them on my show, very grateful, some great entrepreneurs, great business owners, great leaders who go on many podcasts. What have you learned from some of these biggest entrepreneurs who are going on podcasts that you're working with?
Man, I could take that direction. I could take that question in so many different directions. But when you say, what have I learned? Is there something specific that I could touch on?
Yeah, in terms of like the way that they go out and like share their voice specifically and impact others.
Yeah. I mean, first thing I'll say is I remember I had a discussion with Les Brown and I called, this is about a year and a half ago. And he called me up or I called him up. I don't remember which one it was. And I asked him a question. And this is going to be a constant theme that I see with these types of people. He's like 78 or something like that, maybe even 80 now. And I asked him a question. I said, when are you going to retire? He says, why would I retire from something that I'm called to do? The first thing that I consistently see is the people that I work with that go on these podcasts, they're doing it because they feel like they're called to a greater mission. Like there's something that's pulling them to go out and share that message. So that's the first thing is, I think a lot of people need to identify what's that thing that's pulling them rather than trying to push themselves to do something. And the only way, in my opinion, that you find that is you really listen to God. You really listen to what I call those nudges. See, I think there's a lot of people that are listening to this right now that have been in the position where they feel nudged to do something, but they don't do it for a variety of different reasons. There's things that I call good ideas and then God ideas. A good idea is an idea that it comes and it goes. You just kind of lose it. Yeah, whatever. A God idea is one of those things that come and no matter what you do, you just can't shake it. Like it's here today. Maybe it goes away for a couple of days, then it comes back. And then next week is there again. Those are the things from my observation from the people that I've worked with that they take action on and ultimately leads them to going out and sharing their story. Second thing, Johnny, believe it or not, I've worked with some of the biggest names that you can imagine in speaking, and they are very coachable and very trainable. So with that being said, what I've observed of these very high-level individuals I've worked with is that the higher the level that they have achieved, the less ego they have. A lot of the times people don't want to share their message because they have a very big ego. What happens if I mess up? The people that I work with that are at the top levels of entrepreneurship and business, they understand that in order to get to where they want to go, they have to just drop their guard, their defense, put their ego aside and say, I'm an open book, very coachable, very trainable, and also very open to feedback. That's a really big one as well. And Johnny, the third one, this is going to be such a cliche because a lot of the clients I work with, here's the other thing. What I do with my clients, Johnny, is very hands-on. Like we don't just get you booked on podcasts and like, that's it, enjoy. We do very in-depth coaching and training. Just before this call, we had our podcast clinic where we were reviewing our client's podcast. It's like, I want you there. Why? Because if you do not put in the work, do not expect to get a great result. So these individuals will do exactly what we tell them to do, when we tell them to do it, how we tell them to do it. AKA, they got to where they are by following instructions. So I know that there's a lot of people that are listening to this right now, and I want to let everybody know that I'm in this camp too. You've probably been in the position where you went through a program, you bought a course, and you didn't do exactly what they told you to do. You try to like cheat it this way, cheat it that way, and you didn't get the result because you didn't follow the system. So those are really the three biggest things that I consistently see is, number one, instead of pushing themselves, they listen and find that thing that's going to pull them to start to share the story. Two, they drop the ego because that's the thing that's actually going to keep them from getting to where they want to go. And then the third thing that I ultimately really just discussed was they follow instructions step by step. And like I also said, they're very coachable and trainable, which kind of goes into that third point.
Love that. Deven, one final question I kind of want to ask you about is the fact that, you know, your management of everything that's going on. You're helping people get on shows, you're coaching them, you're training them how to do that appropriately. You know, you're running this business, you're creating your own podcast. Is there maybe a couple of points or maybe a few more than that helps you stay on top of everything in terms of your time?
Yeah. Don't we all wish we had 25 hours in the day? So that's the first thing, right? I want to make it abundantly clear. No way, shape, or form do I have this 100% figured out. And I don't think that there's a person out there that does, right? I feel like we always feel like we could be doing more than what we're currently doing. And I just think if somebody's listening to this podcast, Johnny, self-esteem and mindset podcast, a confidence podcast, excuse me, you're definitely that type of person. Like you're definitely that type of person where no matter how productive you are, you always feel like there's so much more to do during the day. But I'll just tell you some of the things that personally work for me. The first thing is to identify the things that you do the best. And what are the things? Couple of different things. For my business owners, the first thing I would say is this: identify what are the most revenue-driven actions that you could take in your business. For some people, it might be sales calls. For some people, it might be being in the ads manager and running your ads, going on podcasts, not doing the admin stuff, inputting the data, so number one, when it comes to where to place your time, the first thing is you have to place your time where it's going to return the greatest investment on that time in terms of dollars. Now, the thing that trips people up on, Johnny, is some of the times that's not the most enjoyable thing to do, but then people just try to delegate it. Sometimes in business, you have to do those things. You just have to do them because they're going to generate the most revenue until you get to a certain point, and then you can start to delegate it. So first thing is, like I said, identify what are my most revenue-driven actions per unit of time. As an example, if I go on a sales call and I sell something for, I don't know, as an example, $10,000. Okay, I'm going to look at everything else I'm doing and I'm going to say, okay, based on everything else I do, what else that I do generates more than $10,000 in 1 hour? If there's nothing else, guess what my number one priority is to do? Those sales calls. That's number one. Number two, overpay people that are really good. See, the things that you do not like to do, they don't just cost you time. They cost you peace of mind. Johnny, you know how many times, man, I've sat at my computer and I worked, quote unquote, worked for 8 hours, but I got nothing done. And then I just sat there frustrated at myself because I got nothing done. But yet I sat there all day. And it was because I hated the things that I was doing that were, and these were things that didn't really produce that much revenue, like setting up this tracker and doing this thing over here and like responding to this little message, trying to do it all myself rather than trying to just hire somebody that's really good. So what I encourage people to do is, number one, start off with a VA. Okay, go to onlinejobs.ph, go to upwork.com, find a really good VA that can do what you need them to do. If you're like beginning, if you're somebody that's more experienced, find somebody that's really good and pay them what they're worth. Do not be afraid to pay people to buy back your peace of mind, not just your time, but your peace of mind, because ultimately that's the whole point of being a business owner, right? Is ultimately to have a life that you enjoy living and a life of freedom. But if you're constantly constrained to a mental prison, that is quite the opposite of freedom. So that's the second piece of the equation. And then the third thing is look for moments of silence, Johnny. I'm really big on waking up as early as I can in the morning. 4:30 to 5:30 a.m. I've been really bad about it the last month. So I'm human. But I say that why? Because before you are met by the demands of other people, you need to make time for you, your health, your fitness, nutrition. These things really matter. And in terms of time management and how do we lead ourselves, if we're not making time for those things that are most important, it doesn't matter. But here's the other thing. If you just wake up and immediately go into work, you have no time to think strategically and to see the things that are opportunities within your life or your business, right? And here's the last thing I'll say on this note. If you're somebody that is a busy person, which we all are, and you want 27 hours in a day, never feel like you're getting enough done, understand that it's okay to also make time for the things that are very important in life. And the things that are most important in life cannot be bought with money. Your friends, your family. I'm not saying go out drinking. I don't do any of that stuff. But what I am saying is call the people you love and tell them you love them. Call your mom and have a conversation that you've been putting off. Call your best friend from high school that you faintly keep in touch with and tell them you miss them. All right. And I'm guilty of this. And I had to learn that the hard way by losing people in my life, that I was just too busy to pick up the phone. So yeah, those are the 4 things I would say, and put a heavy emphasis on that last one, because we live in such a hustle culture where it's like work, grind. But there's going to come a time where if you just constantly do that all of the time, and I am a big proponent of working, but you sacrifice the things that actually mean the most for the things that you thought meant the most, you're going to regret that.
This is some really powerful points and guiding principles to help people with their time management in this day and age. So Deven, really appreciated everything you've shared today, all the work you're doing to help people get their voices out there, to share, to be more of an impact. I know you've got your own podcast, I know you help people get on more podcasts. So as we wrap up today, I'd love to know how people can reach out to you, where they can find you to do those things.
Yeah, Johnny. So one of the things, like I mentioned earlier on, that I really admire about you is you are always going the extra mile for your audience. So you really inspired me to want to do the same for your people as well. So I put together something that I do not give to literally anybody else other than people that pay me a lot of money. But before I tell you guys what it is, let me just tell you who this is for. So this is for really the business owner that you already have an established business. You already have a way that you consistently get leads, but you still feel like either you're relying on one lead source or you're not just getting the exposure that you need, and you know that there's another level. So what I put together is very, very, very simple. 2 things. The first thing that I put together is what I call my podcast database. So what this means is a lot of people want to go on podcasts, but they don't know what are the shows that are going to get them in front of their ideal clients. Well, we've been doing this for over 3 years. We work with thousands of podcasts. What I will do is I will create a custom tailored list of podcasts for anyone that wants it, specifically in your audience, to include the name of the podcast, contact info, everything. Second thing that we'll do, and my team's probably going to get a little upset at this when they hear this, but one of the first things we do with every one of the clients we work with is we call it a podcast conversion audit. In other words, we create a blueprint of how you're actually going to convert on these podcasts. So I'm going to give everybody that's listening the podcast for you to be on. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to offer the first step that I usually take with all of my paying clients to you guys as well, which is that podcast conversion audit. So not only do I give you the podcast, but we'll also give you the blueprint to be able to convert on those podcasts. So if you guys want to get access to that, very simple. Just head over to my Instagram, which is Deven Rod. Once again, I'm going to spell that out for you. Deven Rod. Devenrod, and just send me the 2 words, self-esteem, so that I know you specifically came from Johnny's podcast. Because if you send me any other word, I'm not going to send it to you. Right. So, just send me over self-esteem, and more than happy to give you guys access to all of that good stuff.
Oh, amazing, Deven. That's so generous. Appreciate that value you're giving us. So yeah, if you check out the show notes below, we'll have that in writing. So you can message Deven and get access to those amazing, valuable resources, and find out more about Deven's work and how he and his team can support you as well. So I want to thank you for coming on today, Deven. Appreciate you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.